What if Yuji has access to Sukuna's techniques all along? Crazy, right? Let's find out. Now, as we all know, a curse technique is not just a skill. It is an imprint on the soul, an extension of one's existence that manifests through instinct, training, and will. For a sorcerer, their curse technique is an intrinsic part of their identity, shaping how they fight, survive, and evolve. But what happens when a technique belongs to another being entirely? When Sukuna took control of Yuji's body, his slashing attacks, Cleave and Dismantle, were being executed with seamless precision. These techniques were not external additions to Yuji's body. They were performed through his very being, using his flesh, nerves, and curse energy as a conduit. Have I lost you yet? Good. Hang in there. This raises an unsettling question. If a technique is performed through Yuji's body, does it leave a permanent mark? Can something as powerful as Sukuna's curse technique be ingrained into him, even after Sukuna is no longer in control? Given how deeply a curse technique is tied to the essence of a sorcerer, it is entirely possible that Sukuna's abilities were imprinted onto Yuji, yet they remain dormant, sealed not by external forces, but by Yuji's own mind. After the horrors Yuji encountered in Shibuya and not being able to save people who mattered to him, it's safe to say our boy was broken. Trauma is a powerful suppressor. The Shibuya incident was not just a battle, it was an event that shattered Yuji's perception of himself. Watching helplessly as Sukuna used his body to slaughter thousands, Yuji was forced to bear the consequences of actions he did not commit, yet were carried out through his own hands. The sheer weight of this event may have created a subconscious rejection of anything connected to Sukuna, including his techniques. Before that, it's safe to say that Yuji hated Sukuna and his methods. The mind has ways of protecting itself from unbearable realities. Just as a person can block out painful memories, Yuji may have unknowingly blocked access to Cleave and Dismantle. If the body remembers, if the soul retains its experiences, then the knowledge of Sukuna's technique should exist within him. And yet, despite facing overwhelming threats where such an ability could have saved his life, not once has Yuji instinctively tapped into these techniques. This is not a coincidence. It's suppression. The rejection is not just about power, it is about identity. If Yuji were to wield Cleave and Dismantle, it would mean accepting that Sukuna is not just a foreign entity, but something that has left an irreversible mark on him. Every slash, every cut would serve as a reminder that he is not separate from Sukuna, that a part of him has been altered. For someone who sees himself as human, for someone who despises Sukuna and what he represents, this is a reality Yuji cannot allow himself to acknowledge. But what if the suppression is not entirely subconscious? What if Yuji knows, at least on some level, that he has access to Sukuna's techniques, yet refuses to use them? If cursed energy responds to will, then it is not just a lack of ability that keeps these techniques sealed away. It is a choice. A vessel is meant to contain, not inherit. But if the power of the King of Curses has already seeped into Yuji's being, the question is not whether he can use it. The question is whether he ever will. There are several pieces of evidence and cues littered all over the series. Let's explore a few of these. The idea that Yuji may already possess Sukuna's technique, but is mentally rejecting it, is supported by several key factors in the series. From the way cursed energy functions to the nature of cursed techniques themselves. The evidence suggests that the line between Sukuna and Yuji may not be as clear-cut as it seems. Cursed techniques are more than just learned skills. They are deeply tied to the user's very essence. Once a technique is awakened, it becomes a part of the sorcerer, functioning as an automatic extension of their will. This is why certain families pass down techniques genetically, and why techniques are not easily interchangeable. However, the case of Kenjaku proves that cursed techniques can persist beyond their original owner. By taking over different bodies, Kenjaku has demonstrated that a cursed technique remains imprinted on the body even when a new soul takes over. If a technique can remain within a body long after its original owner is gone, then it's entirely plausible that Sukuna's technique could have been imprinted onto Yuji through prolonged possession. Furthermore, Mahito's exploration of the soul reinforces this idea. When Mahito experiments on his victims, he manipulates the soul to reshape the body, proving that identity, power, and even cursed techniques are not just physical attributes, but deeply tied to the soul's structure. If Yuji's soul has been altered by Sukuna's presence, then the possibility of his techniques remaining within him is more than likely. From the very beginning, Yuji has demonstrated an unusual level of resistance to Sukuna's influence. Unlike other vessels, he does not lose control easily, and even when Sukuna is in power, Yuji remains aware of what is happening. This level of synchronization suggests a deeper connection than simply being a host. Additionally, Sukuna has never once expressed concern that Yuji might access his techniques. If Sukuna were truly confident that his power was his alone, there would be no need for such certainty. Instead, his silence on the matter could indicate that he is aware of Yuji's suppression and simply waiting for the right moment for the block to break. In life or death situations, a sorcerer's instincts take over. When pushed to the brink, Yuji has demonstrated immense adaptability, even learning Black Flash in the middle of battle. Yet, despite facing enemies where Cleave and Dismantle would be the perfect counters, he has never once shown even an accidental use of these abilities. The absence of any instinctual activation suggests that something is preventing the techniques from surfacing. If Yuji's body has memory, if his soul retains its experiences, then the most logical explanation is that his mind is suppressing the techniques on a fundamental level. Now that it's been established, let's talk about what happens if he were to break that block. If Yuji's suppression were to break, the effects would be immediate and irreversible. The moment his mind allows access to Cleave and Dismantle, he would gain an entirely new method of combat, one that does not rely on brute strength but on precise, devastating slashes that ignore conventional durability. This change would have profound effects on both Yuji's battles and his psyche. Would he be able to wield these techniques without losing himself? Or would using Sukuna's power bring him closer to becoming the very thing he despises? The morality of such a decision would weigh heavily on him. Is it acceptable to use a weapon of mass slaughter if it means saving lives? If Yuji embraces Sukuna's technique, does that mean he is no longer separate from him? We saw how scary it was when Yuji accepted that himself and Mahito were the same, just before he wanted to kill him. You can almost tell that something broke inside of him. With Sukuna, the effects would be much worse. If he chooses to accept Cleave and Dismantle, it is not just a shift in power, it is a shift in identity. Would using Sukuna's techniques mean inheriting more than just his abilities? Would it mean inheriting his nature? Or would it be the ultimate act of defiance, wielding the King of Curse's own power against him, proving that even the greatest curse can be turned into something else entirely? The answer lies not in whether Yuji can use Sukuna's technique, but in whether he will ever allow himself to. Now let's explore a what-if scenario where Yuji has had access to Cleave and Dismantle since Sukuna leaving his body. Now, spoiler alert if you're anime only. A breaking point is inevitable. If the suppression of Sukuna's technique is a result of trauma or psychological resistance, then there exists a threshold where the block shatters, either forcibly or by choice. The moment Yuji taps into Cleave and Dismantle, whether consciously or instinctively, the consequences will be immediate and irreversible. Several possible scenarios could trigger this awakening. The most likely involves extreme emotional distress, an event so overwhelming that Yuji's subconscious is forced to remove its own restrictions. Throughout the series, his greatest moments of growth have stemmed from loss, rage, and desperation. The deaths of Nanami and Nobara broke him emotionally, but neither event unlocked anything beyond his existing capabilities. If he were to experience an even greater moment of anguish, perhaps the loss of another ally, or the realization that his current strength is insufficient, it could serve as the catalyst that removes the mental block. Yuji Itadori's journey is defined by the tension between his humanity and the monstrous power lurking inside him. His strength has always been his own, shaped by sheer will and relentless effort, yet his greatest burden is the presence of Sukuna. If, however, Yuji had access to Cleave and Dismantle all along, the trajectory of his battles, his relationships, even his self-perception would change drastically. The struggle would no longer be just about rejecting Sukuna, it would be about rejecting a part of himself. The battle against Mahito was one of Yuji's most painful encounters, forcing him to confront the cruelty of the Jujutsu world firsthand. Losing Junpei was devastating, but the death of Nanami broke something even deeper within him. This was the moment when Yuji's resolve hardened, when he fully accepted the role of an executioner. But in this altered timeline, it could also be the moment when Cleave and Dismantle first manifest. Mahito's idol transfiguration manipulates souls directly, forcing a reaction from his targets at the core of their being. If Sukuna's technique had always been with Yuji, hidden beneath layers of mental blocks, then Mahito's touch could have acted as the key that unlocked it. The surge of cursed energy in response to the violation of Yuji's soul wouldn't be an explosion of raw force, but something far deadlier, an instinctual slash, a tearing of Mahito's body body beyond normal means of regeneration. The fight would take a sharp turn. Mahito's greatest advantage, his fluid, ever-changing form, would be rendered useless if Yuji's attacks automatically dissected him at a fundamental level. Unlike Black Flash, which required precision and timing, Cleave and Dismantle would act on instinct, responding to Mahito's threat with ruthless efficiency. The moment Yuji understood what was happening, panic would set in. This wasn't his own power. This wasn't something he trained for. This was Sukuna's technique emerging from within him. But that's not the end of his troubles. Now that he has an idea, he can use Cleave. Shibuya was the turning point for Yuji, the moment when he truly felt the weight of being a sorcerer. The thousands of innocent lives lost at Sukuna's hands weren't just casualties of war. They were deaths caused by the monster inside him, a monster he couldn't control. But if Yuji had already begun tapping into Sukuna's power before this, then his guilt wouldn't just be from standing by helplessly. It would be from realizing that his own hands were capable of the same level of destruction. His battle with Chozo would have been far more vicious. In the real timeline, Chozo overwhelms Yuji, nearly killing him with piercing blood. But with Cleave and Dismantle, the fight would change entirely. Chozo's fluid blood manipulation techniques rely on redirecting and controlling the movement of his attacks. But if Yuji's body instinctively activated Sukuna's slashes, his counterattacks would be unavoidable. The moment Chozo pushed too hard, his own blood could be turned against him, severed in midair before it could reach its target. Instead of losing decisively, Yuji might match Chozo in sheer lethality, forcing the battle into a brutal stalemate rather than a one-sided defeat. Then comes the aftermath of Sukuna's rampage. In the original timeline, Yuji wakes up to a sea of bodies and collapses under the weight of his guilt. But if Cleave and Dismantle had already become part of him, the horror would cut even deeper. Instead of just blaming Sukuna, Yuji would have to face the possibility that he could have used that same power to stop him, but didn't. That realization alone could push him into a mental spiral far worse than what was originally shown. Here's where it all comes to a halt. The final battle with Mahito was about more than just power. It was about ideology. In the original timeline, Yuji didn't just beat Mahito physically, he crushed him psychologically, stripping him of any sense of superiority before finishing him off. But with Cleave and Dismantle in the picture, the fight would be over far more quickly, and it would be far uglier. Mahito's strongest advantage was his adaptability. As long as he could keep evolving, he had a chance to survive. But Cleave, by nature, adjusts to the opponent's durability, ensuring that every strike is fatal. The moment Yuji's body fully accepted the techniques, Mahito's regeneration would become irrelevant. No matter how many times he tried to shift his form, no matter how many tricks he used, the slashes would cut through him all the same. The fight wouldn't end with Geto absorbing Mahito. Instead, Mahito would meet his final moments staring directly into Yuji's eyes, not as a cursed spirit mocking a weak human, but as a dying creature realizing that it had finally met something it couldn't outrun. And for Yuji, this wouldn't be a victory. It would be confirmation that he was becoming the very thing he swore to destroy. Now come the calling games. Yuji is still in denial, but with Sukuna's technique at his disposal, his role in the calling games would shift dramatically. The fight against Higuruma would be especially complicated. In the original timeline, Yuji wins not through strength, but through sheer conviction, proving that he can bear the weight of his sins. But what if Cleave and Dismantle are activated during their battle? Higuruma's domain expansion relies on rules and judgment, but Sukuna's technique doesn't operate within laws. If Cleave activated the moment Yuji's cursed energy surged, would it disrupt the trial entirely? Would Higuruma recognize what was happening and realize that Yuji's power was far beyond what he expected? The fight would become far more volatile, with Yuji struggling to keep himself in check while Higuruma questions whether someone wielding such a technique deserves a second chance at life. But the true breaking point would be his confrontation with Megami. In the real timeline, Yuji fights desperately to save Megami from Sukuna's control. But if Cleave and Dismantle had been within him all along, then his struggle against Sukuna wouldn't just be ideological, it would be physical. The final clash between them wouldn't just be about stopping Sukuna. It would be a battle of the same technique against itself, with Yuji proving whether he could truly surpass the King of Curses in raw power. If Yuji had access to Cleave and Dismantle all along, the final battle against Sukuna wouldn't just be about sealing him away. It would be about proving that he is different from him. In the real timeline, Yuji's strength comes from his unwavering will, the ability to push forward no matter how much he loses. But with Sukuna's technique already embedded in him, his journey would be a little more complicated than the one we witnessed. Would he be able to harness the power without losing himself? Or would he ultimately become what he despised the most? Anime lover boy here, mid-editing. I just wanted to pause the video and ask you to subscribe if you like this kind of video. And while you're down there, why not leave a like as well? When Sukuna finally abandoned Yuji's body and took over Megami, the world shifted. The long-lasting struggle between the two 2 was over, or so it seemed. Yuji, left behind, should have been nothing more than a shell, an empty vessel stripped of the monstrous power that had plagued him since he swallowed that first finger. But something was wrong. At first, Yuji felt nothing. The weight of Sukuna's presence was gone, and in its place was an unfamiliar emptiness. His body, which was constantly fighting against the influence of the King of Curses, felt lighter. But that relief didn't last long. The battle continued to rage, and Yuji, determined to save Megumi, threw himself back into the fight. It was then, in the heat of battle, that something shifted. When Yuji engaged in battle alongside his allies, it was Yuki Tsukumo who first noticed it. The way Yuji moved, the way his attacks landed. There was something unnatural about it. At first, it was easy to dismiss as sheer instinct, the product of years of fighting at a level far beyond what should be humanly possible. But then it happened. A single strike, one meant to be a clean hit, split the air itself. The enemy before him, a lesser curse that should have been knocked back, was carved apart in an instant. No physical force could explain it. No conventional curse technique could either. Yuki's eyes widened. This wasn't just raw strength. This was Cleave and Dismantle. The realization hit her like a curse's fist to the gut. Sukuna had left, but his power had not. And if Yuji was using it now, then the implications were horrifying. Was this a remnant of Sukuna's influence? Had his soul been altered permanently? Or worse, had Sukuna always been part of Yuji in a way no one understood? Yuji, unaware of what had just happened, pressed forward, but Yuki couldn't let this go unanswered. She called, forcing him to stop as she questioned him to know if he was aware of what he just did. Yuji, looking confused, looked at the blood-stained battlefield around him, wondering what she was talking about. Yuji would soon realize that despite Sukuna being gone, his technique has become engraved in his body. The words struck like a hammer to the chest. Yuji froze. The battlefield disappeared. Everything blurred into a sharp, suffocating realization. Sukuna was gone, but his technique was still inside him. Elsewhere, Sukuna, now in Megumi's body, had already foreseen this possibility. He had known, from the moment he made the switch, that something wasn't quite right. The connection between himself and Yuji had never been normal. It had been something more than just a vessel relationship. The boy wasn't like the others who had swallowed his fingers and perished instantly. He had resisted. He had adapted. He had survived things no human should have been able to. And now, he had retained a piece of his own power. The thought was revolting, infuriating. Yuji was supposed to be nothing, a temporary inconvenience, a mere stepping stone toward true reincarnation. Yet now, even after discarding him, his influence lingered. Sukuna clenched his fists, his rage barely contained. He had expected it. The moment he felt even the slightest trace of his cursed technique still active within that boy, he knew his suspicion had been correct. The soul, once touched by a power as immense as his, does not simply revert to what it once was. Yuji had changed, and the worst part, the boy didn't even realize it. What happens next is a shocking turn of events. With this revelation, the battlefield takes on a new dimension. Yuji, now aware that he still holds a fragment of Sukuna's power, faces an impossible choice. Does he embrace it, knowing full well what it means? Or does he continue rejecting it, fighting against something that has already become part of him? Meanwhile, Sukuna, now possessing Megumi's body, must decide how to deal with this unexpected problem. Does he try to strip Yuji of his stolen power by force? Or does he see this as an opportunity to shape Yuji into something even more dangerous? As the battle rages on, there is also a possibility that the technique evolves. Knowing Yuji, let us entertain the event that he actually embraces it and tries to do something else with it. What happens next? Curse techniques are not static. Throughout the history of sorcery, powerful techniques have shown the ability to evolve, refine, and adapt based on the user's combat experience, curse energy control, and mental state. Gojo Satoru's Limitless is a prime example. While Limitless was an inherited ability, Gojo took it a step further, refining it to create Hollow Purple, a technique that had not existed before in recorded history. Similarly, Megumi Fushiguro's 10 Shadows technique showed evidence of progression beyond its previous wielders, particularly in his ability to command Madaraga, something no past user had done successfully. If Yuji truly possesses Sukuna's curse technique, whether consciously or not, the possibility that it is not lying dormant, but instead changing within him, not merely suppressed, but being altered into something new. Now, how would this happen, you ask? Cleave and Dismantle are techniques designed for absolute destruction. Sukuna does not fight with precision, he fights with dominance. His slashes do not simply cut, they erase whatever is in their path, ignoring durability and bypassing conventional forms of defense. However, Yuji's fighting style does not align with this philosophy. Unlike Sukuna, who fights with overwhelming force and sheer arrogance, Yuji is a close-quarters brawler whose instincts revolve around adaptability, durability, and limiting collateral damage. If Yuji subconsciously rejects Sukuna's technique, his body may be reshaping it into into a version that aligns with his own instincts rather than Sukuna's. One possibility is that Yuji's body is modifying the nature of the slashes, not to kill or erase, but to weaken or neutralize his opponents. Instead of Cleave and Dismantle cutting in a way that scales with the opponent's toughness, Yuji's version would interact with cursed energy directly, severing it rather than the physical body. This would turn it into a technique focused on disabling enemies rather than killing them outright, making it more aligned with Yuji's moral compass. Another possibility is that Yuji's natural resistance to poisons and physical attacks could be merging with the technique to create a hybrid ability, one that functions as both an offensive and defensive mechanism. Sukuna's Cleave and Dismantle are purely destructive, but what if Yuji's body is unconsciously repurposing the technique into something that only cuts but also reinforces his durability? This could explain why Yuji's physical endurance is beyond human, despite his initial lack of a cursed technique. His body may already be utilizing a latent version of Cleave and Dismantle, not as a tool for destruction, but as a means of reinforcing itself, making him harder to injure, or even allowing him to cut through attacks that should otherwise harm him. There have been instances in the series where Yuji's attacks seem to exceed what should be possible for a fighter without a cursed technique. The force behind his Black Flash strikes has rivaled the destructive capabilities of even seasoned sorcerers. While Black Flash is primarily a result of refined cursed energy manipulation, could it be possible that Yuji's Black Flash is subtly enhanced by a modified version of Cleave and Dismantle? If Cleave and Dismantle alter the way cursed energy interacts with matter, then Yuji's own cursed energy output may be unconsciously shaped by the technique's properties, giving his strikes a cutting force that is invisible to the naked eye. This could explain why even without traditional weaponry, Yuji is able to inflict devastating damage on opponents far more powerful than himself. Another moment to consider is his fight against Mahito. When Yuji and Todo worked together to push Mahito to his limit, Mahito felt fear for the first time. But why? Mahito had fought stronger sorcerers before, yet something about Yuji's presence instinctively terrified him. If Mahito's ability functions by manipulating souls, and Sukuna's Cleave and Dismantle are directly tied to the soul's essence, then Yuji may have unknowingly released traces of the technique without realizing it. If Yuji's suppressed technique is evolving, then the moment he fully accepts it or awakens it, it may no longer be identical to Sukuna's. Instead, it could be a completely new variation, unique to Yuji alone. But we can't ask this question without knowing why Yuji's body is the perfect vessel for Sukuna. The question of why Yuji was chosen as Sukuna's vessel remains one of the biggest mysteries in Jujutsu Kaisen. Unlike past incarnations of Sukuna, who retained his full form, Yuji did not disintegrate upon consuming Sukuna's fingers. Not only that, but he was able to suppress Sukuna's influence almost immediately, something no other vessel had been able to do. This raises a fundamental question. Was Yuji born with a body specifically designed to house Sukuna's techniques? Was Yuji engineered to wield Sukuna's power? Kenjaku's involvement cannot be ignored. As someone who has spent centuries manipulating bloodlines and experimenting with the limits of cursed energy, Kenjaku may have deliberately created a body that could withstand Sukuna's full power. If this is true, then Yuji was not simply coincidental in his ability to host Sukuna. He was the ideal vessel. Unlike previous attempts at reincarnation, which resulted in instability or loss of control, Yuji represents a perfect fusion of human and curse. This could mean that his body is not just suppressing Sukuna's power, it may actually be optimizing it, making it more efficient than even Sukuna himself could achieve. If Yuji had access to Sukuna's techniques all along, the story would go a lot differently. Yuji would struggle, but eventually come to accept it, maybe grow hopeful and shape the technique in the way that he wants it to be. Well, that's it for today's video, and I hope you like it. What do you think about Yuji having Sukuna's techniques? How do you think it will affect the story? Let us know in the comments. Until next time.